I talk about pleasure and desire, joy and happiness, mothering and tending, and grief, all intertwined. Let's begin the conversation. Let's just allow the body to move, to just do that lovely swirling, maybe to like exhale out of the body, really just tender, maybe at the heart space, and just really allowing for that acknowledgement of where this work might stem to, from, be, feeling into the body, noticing the body, and just being with like a really small sacred pause. Yeah. So I talk a lot about the pelvis and this ability to tend to ourselves as mothers from our rooted space, because this is ignored in society in general as a taboo space. And the reason being, in my opinion, is that it allows for the patriarchal misogyny to bind us into the perpetual cycle of being tired, dysregulated, not feeling pleasure, not feeling the joy, the happiness, and allows for the messages that are quick fixes and not rooted experiences to prevail, because they will feel easier to access as someone who is feeling perpetually tired and dysregulated. So to actually access pure joy and pleasure can feel very aloof. It can feel like it's over there oftentimes, and on a real biology sense, our pleasure and that ability to basically make babies is parked often for stress. So it's the only expendable system. Our fertility system is the only expendable system. So when our cycle goes AWOL and we're not ovulating, that's because it's the expendable system that's like, nah mate, I can't make a baby. It's not safe. I'm not in a space to make a baby. So essentially what we need to acknowledge is that we have an expendable system that needs to be acknowledged, and if that is even just remotely AWOL, on top of just a general stress of life, or remotely there's painful periods or PMS feelings, or questioning about whether we're going into our perimenopause probably because of stress, maybe more than whether we're actually going into perimenopause. So many conversations can happen around this. And if we're not acknowledging the pelvis as our rooted space, as our primal rooted space, where pleasure and desire and joy stems from our rooted space, then we're also allowing for the patriarchal misogynistic system to prevail. And as mothers, when we step into motherhood, one of the easiest things to completely disappear for us is sex, is the ability to connect with our partners on an intimate level, is self-intimacy and intimacy with others, and is our disconnect from our pelvis. If there has been a traumatic birth, that will be also and I say this term traumatic birth, and I'm starting to question it around like if it was a traumatic birth, because you could have the birth that you're looking for, such as a birth that's at home, in your birth pool, in your bedroom, or in your kitchen, in your basement, just literally living your best life, but also still feel like a traumatic birth, because babies come out and it can still feel like challenging and sometimes savage, and that's also creates and sometimes there has to be longer pushing time, or there isn't enough time to process the birth because the baby came so quick, whatever it looks like. So pleasure stems from an ability to come back into connection with that space and move through any challenges that are coming up from that space, and that could be linked to anything pelvic health wise and anything experiential wise that we haven't allowed to be touched upon, discussed, move through the body in a really beautiful somatic way. So what I see is pleasure and desire stems from an ability to tap into pleasure and desire on a very low level. I'm not talking about having this orgasmic, pleasurable experience from life. I'm talking about our ability to be within the body and feel into and tap into what actually does give us pleasure and joy. And I have asked this question many times to many women over the years, and oftentimes women cannot actually access the very basics of what brings them pleasure and joy and be with that pleasure and joy in its entirety. So what I think is really, really, really important is to acknowledge is that pleasure and desire is also linked to grief work. Grief work is messy and hard and complicated. Grief work around pleasure and desire is also interlinked with so many other challenges, such as the community that we live in, the society that we exist in, the way we exist within that society, our experiences that we have had, and not just our experiences, but the generations before us, their experiences. And how we also navigate this world and how we fit into communities will also impact the way we feel pleasure and desire. I'm currently speaking to, because I'm looking to launch this really beautiful 8-week container for mothers, the community of mothers and how they experience pleasure and desire and the grief that comes up with that. Grief work of that journey in matrescence where we have to let go of certain aspects of who we were and who we look to be in order to be the mother that we feel we would like to show up for. As in, we allow for ourselves to be tended to fully, and then we allow ourselves to feel into the work that it takes to be of tending to our children. And this isn't as simple as our society makes it, because oftentimes parents, mothers, feel like they're working from a space of pure exhaustion and inability to show up in a way that they want to show up because the system has rigged it that way. And so what we have to allow for is grief. We have to allow for the grief of who we are, were, are, grief of maybe birth, grief of relationships and how they adjust and change, not just relationships in the immediate family, nuclear family, but relationships on a bigger level, friendships, and where we are allowing ourselves to navigate moving forward. So in order to tend to those parts of us, in order to tend to those pieces of us, we have to allow for a nervous system led approach that allows us to unfurl gently into grief, the grief work that is needed every fucking damn day, and then allows us to tend to the parts of us that show up in need of more tending. And how do we do that? Well, we need a resource, we need tools, we need a resource basket in order to do that. And we need to have a community around us who totally sees everything that we're having to navigate and can hear us in that. So that's why I'm really keen on talking about pleasure and desire. And I talk about it from a space of the root, the vagina, the vulva, the pelvis, the womb. And it allows for us to unfurl into the conversation with so much more ease if we talk about it from that rooted space. So I have this really beautiful Mothering Abundantly container. It's 8 weeks long. It is a luxurious, sacred container that will enable a woman to leave never the same again, because they will have tended to parts of them that they didn't even know needed tended to before they began, and will allow them to leave with more of a sense of wholeness and the tools required to move into mothering of ourselves and our children moving forward, and allowing for the grief work to come up around what it has meant to step into motherhood in our community and in your community and in your space and in your lineage. So I'm sending so much love, and I'm going to put the link below.